Hello there, we are back with you discussing Afghanistan, this time in the light of the exclusive interview that CNN News 18 has with the former first Vice President of Afghanistan, Amrullah Saleh, who's called out Pakistan and its role in emboldening Taliban and has also spoken about the resistance that is being mounted from Panjshir. We will have with us on this broadcast Praveen Swami, Group Consulting Editor, as well as our investigations editor, Manoj Gupta, who normally chooses to be behind the scenes, but today we'll have him with us talking about this resistance in Panjshir. But before that, let's quickly listen in to exactly what Amrullah Saleh said.
In Pakistan, they used Pakistan as a support base. They were not having sanctuaries there. The whole of Pakistan was in the service of the Taliban. United States tried to incentivize the Pakistani cooperation to buy it. The more they paid, it more emboldened the Pakistanis to provide more services and more aid to the Taliban. So the issue of a nuclear state sponsoring terrorism and insurgency against our Western allies and the Afghan state was never addressed. Yeah. The second reason is the Doha talks legitimized the Taliban. And the Taliban did not remain loyal to their words. They did not honor their commitments, and they fooled the whole international community. The purpose of the Doha office was to keep the international community divided, keep them hopeful for a peace process which did not exist, but they were investing on military conquest, and Pakistanis were backing them wholeheartedly. The bottom line is NATO is gone, US military is gone, but the Afghan people are not gone, and the Afghan people cannot be evacuated. Kabul airport is tip of an iceberg. The country has sunk into a tragedy. We will fight until the enemy believes and comes to a conclusion that Afghanistan should remain Afghanistan and it should not become Talibanistan.
All right, let me go across to Praveen Swami and Manoj Gupta, both of them here joining us on the show. Praveen, coming first to you, the biggest takeaway for you from this interview of Amrullah Saleh?
The fighting words. The Afghan people are not gone. And there's a bit of history to this, which is quite important. So in 1992, the Soviet-backed government of President Mohammad Najibullah was finally brought down by this coalition called the Afghan Mujahideen. And there were a number of parties together in the Mujahideen, which, however, failed to unify. And a brutal civil war broke out for many, many years. Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, was devastated. And eventually the Pakistanis then abandoned these groups who had been their allies in fighting the Soviet Union and propped up the Taliban, which was a movement of basically seminary students, many of whom had studied in various religious institutions in Pakistan, or their leadership had. The Taliban, quite with Pakistani support, rolled over the resistance pretty quickly. And finally, on the eve of 9/11, only the Panjshir Valley was left standing, with a leader called Ahmad Shah Massoud. And of course, Amrullah Saleh knows Ahmad Shah Massoud well. He was his translator as a young man then, backing the sort of remnants of the Northern Alliance in the Panjshir Valley were Russia, Iran, and of course, India. Many Indian diplomats today, intelligence officials, recall desperately struggling to keep this last pocket of resistance somehow alive. Mr. Saleh is hoping again for a miracle to happen, as it did after 9/11, when the world turned against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and is trying to hope that Panjshir once again becomes the nucleus of some kind of popular resistance to Taliban rule. We'll have to wait and see if that can actually happen. But fighting words, very courageous words. He's one of few senior leaders not to have left Afghanistan. we'll have to see where this resistance, though, finally goes in military terms.
In fact, the other point that he made was that the Taliban were being emboldened by Pakistan, and also the fact that the Doha talks legitimized Taliban as well. Let me bring in our investigations editor, Manoj Gupta, now. Manoj, does Amrullah Saleh believe that he should have spoken about Pakistan's role much more and much earlier?
This Amrullah is always very critical of Pakistan. On every occasion, he always spoke about Pakistan, pain given by them, losses given by ISI to them and the Afghan people. Whole Afghan leadership went to Doha for talks, but he never went because he never participated in any talks mediated by Pakistan.
Interesting, Praveen. Manoj mentions the Doha talks. Amrullah Saleh had also mentioned the talks in Doha. And many people actually are speaking about it. In fact, yesterday I spoke with Hashmat Ghani, the brother of Ashraf Ghani, who has chosen also to, in fact, accept the circumstances, as he said. He also pointed out the same thing, saying that when the US struck a deal with Taliban, when the Doha negotiations were on, and when the Afghan government was left out of those talks, then they pretty much legitimized the Taliban. And they should have seen this coming. Would you agree with this viewpoint?
That they should have seen it coming. I would argue that anyone with even a basic knowledge of military issues would have, in fact, said it was coming. I and other people have been writing this since 2018, that the balance of power had rapidly shifted against the Afghan state. To give Mr. Saleh credit, he was one of the few people in the Afghan system who was hostile to this process to start off with. The reality is, though, that the political forces he speaks for, really don't have the coherence, or he doesn't have the numbers to really resist that superpower push towards the so-called reconciliation with the Taliban. If you look at a map right now, and it's important to get some sense of what Panjshir is. It's two relatively tiny, it's a tiny valley that is cut off. On the one side lies the Anjuman Pass, which then stretches into the mountains of Badakhshan and then on to the border. And on the other side, there is a highway on one side heading towards Kunduz and then to Afghanistan's northern neighbors, on the other side to Kabul in the south. And to keep the Panjshir Valley somehow supplied, this highway has to be controlled. Now, back in that earlier battle against the Taliban, which we were talking about, the Northern Alliance did quite well until its ally Abdul Rashid Dostum was defeated in the Battle of Mazar-e-Sharif, after which the Taliban conducted a great and tragic massacre in the city. But following the fall of the city, it was squeezed. It's just geographically, if you can imagine a little bowl in the middle right now of a great Taliban presence. Now, what is also happening, though, and this is why this resistance is important, is that other leaders from the Panjshir area, among them Abdullah, who was involved in those talks with the resistance, many other, with the Taliban, many other leaders are actually having negotiations with the Taliban and trying to persuade them that, look, you have to share power if you want to avoid a civil war. And I think for them, this resistance in Panjshir is a very important bargaining chip. The more aggressive and strong it can be, the better the chances they believe of pushing some kind of bargain with the Taliban. And there is the real significance. I think it's a little unrealistic to hope that this tiny valley will somehow now roll back the Taliban. That too, when, unlike in 99, no foreign countries are supporting them in that 99-2001 period. Today, no foreign country is supporting them, except to some extent verbally Tajikistan. But the important thing here is they're showing that there is defiance. They're showing that Afghanistan is a plurality of ethnicities, not all of whom accept the Taliban, and will hopefully be able to bargain better for a share of power when this is finally done.
All right. Let me bring in Manoj Gupta back then on this count. Manoj, what did Amrullah Saleh tell you about how much a fight they can give from Panjshir Valley?
be very frank, it is difficult to assess the exact numbers and fighters, ammunition they have. And secondly, I never notice any kind of panic or pressure whenever we try to talk to Saleh or people around him. Ghani left with his team, but Amrullah sent message same evening that he's in Afghanistan with his own people. But we should remember this fight is more tactical in nature. I think Masood and Amrullah both know the terrain very well, but difficult to predict.
Difficult to predict. Praveen, Manoj saying pretty much the same thing. At best, they can bring about some sort of change in the manner in which power is being negotiated, even as we speak, as the Taliban is looking at forming the government. Uh, what would you say would be the role of Dr. Abdullah, Hamid Karzai, the former president of Afghanistan? They are all there in Afghanistan. They have not fled.
There are a very large number of Afghan leaders who have stayed on. I think we should also give a shout out or salute the courage of not just political leaders but some incredible Afghan women who have stayed on in not just Kabul but some of the most disturbed and sort of Taliban dominated regions of Afghanistan, running schools, running local NGOs. Incredible acts of courage we have seen during this period. But, the reality is the Taliban has the support of a nation state, that is the Pakistani state, and the opposition does not. For their own reasons, Iran, China, Russia, which are the three dominant regional powers, were more interested in having America out of the region than worried about the Taliban's rise. And all three are trying to negotiate some kind of settlement which brings stability and lets them have some say in Afghanistan's future. And are perfectly happy to do business with the Taliban to the extent the Taliban helps them do that. In assessing the future of any resistance, I think at least the short-term prospects will be determined by external support. In the longer run, the Taliban will have a lot of problems. This is because, firstly, its own military forces, though they defeated the Afghan armed forces, aren't very big. It's one thing to be an insurgent force and attack a conventional army. It's another thing to rule yourself and conventionally, actually be able to police, protect, defend. The second fact is that the Taliban have in their ranks many people, both of whose ethnic biases and whose sort of conception of Islam will annoy and aggravate very many ordinary Afghans and has done so in the past. So, if you like, this is the fall of the curtain between two acts of the play. The play is yet to finish. And hopefully, some of the people who are resisting today, whether they are resistance leaders like Amrullah Saleh, whether they're politicians like Abdullah or Mr. Karzai, or whether they are these innumerable heroic young Afghans, particularly women, who are standing up for their country in the face of Taliban terror, I think we'll have to wait and see. And, probably the course most governments are going to take is to wait and watch a little bit to see which way the wind blows.
Do you mean to say that countries will at some stage recognize a Taliban government, and many more than we had previously seen, more than 3 countries for sure this time around? And how does that very, very quickly, Praveen, how does that augur in future for other countries? Because at the end of the day, Taliban was an insurgent group which has taken power. Now, a country like China is also very wary of these kind of sentiments, whether they are insurgent sentiments or separatist sentiments in Xinjiang. How does this, what kind of messaging is being done through this for the rest of the world?
So the simple answer to that is China, Russia, Iran, for their own reasons, are suspicious of the kind of hardline Islamism the Taliban represents. But as I said, they were more interested in seeing the United States out, and they've developed their relationships with the Taliban to years to a point where they believe they can bribe, cajole them. There's also a feeling in many world capitals that the Afghanistan the Taliban is now inheriting is very different from the Afghanistan of 20 years ago. There's millions of Afghans who are plugged into the ecosystem that comes with international aid, development assistance, even this limited World Bank decision to suspend its aid. That means that some 30% of Afghans will not get a salary anymore. And there is hope in some quarters that this will be a message to the Taliban that, look, behave yourself, or else this sword is over your neck. Now, observers like me might be quite skeptical about this, about whether the Taliban will in fact be deterred by these threats over its head. What Taliban commanders on the ground may feel as opposed to their leaders in Doha who negotiated with the Americans is another story. But I think the sad truth is most countries will edge towards recognition simply because this is the power on the ground. And horrible as it may be, countries have done business with them. I mean, in one sense, when the Americans began negotiating with the Taliban, a sanctioned entity, many years ago, it was a form of recognition, a de facto recognition. Even now, diplomats from around the world are meeting the Taliban in Kabul, just even the CIA chief. So a kind of a de facto recognition is there. I think the wise thing for India to do, however, is that we have the luxury of not being a proximate neighbor of Afghanistan, in the sense that we don't have a physical land border with Afghanistan because Pakistan occupied Kashmir lies in the middle. So we have a little bit more buffer from the consequences than the proximate neighbors. We don't have the same equities as Western countries in this region. So we can afford to wait and watch just a little bit longer to see how things play out.
Final question, Praveen, before I let you and Manoj go. This is about, again, the resistance from Panjshir Valley. Why is it that the global community is not willing to back any of these, resistance groups rather, be it Panjshir, or we saw some spurts of resistance in Jalalabad as well. Why does the global community feel it's not worth it backing them?
I think the simple logic, remember Amrullah Saleh after 9/11 fought the Taliban in alliance with the United States. I've met him many times at many functions. He has fabulous stories to tell of that period. He was trained by the Central Intelligence Agency. But as he said, once the United States had taken the decision that it did not want to fight this war, that it was not in America's interest to fight this war, there's very little else anyone can do. Unfortunately, and not for the first time in its history, Afghanistan's fate has been decided by the alignment of great power politics. America did not want to be spending war. It believes it can protect itself perfectly happily across its two oceans without this vast commitment of resources. The two great regional powers, Russia and China, plus Iran, want the Americans out because the Americans and them have had a deepening conflict for many years now. India, both in the period before 9/11, when it was closely allied with Russia and Iran, again after 9/11, when it was closely allied with United States interests, has worked on the back of what the immediately proximate powers, the bigger powers have done. And contributed, in fact, in an outsized way on both occasions. But the reality is we are not an immediate neighbor. We can help at the margins, but we cannot be the lead in this. The rest of the world has made its calculations. They live with the price of it, as of course will we and other neighboring states. What we have to do is, I think, India has to be relentlessly focused on its own interests now, and wait and see where the pieces in this puzzle fall for this next act of the play.
All right. Praveen Swami and Manoj Gupta, both of you, many thanks for joining us for that insightful conversation. Your perspective as well, valuable there, because very few people really understand this area as well as both of you probably do, because of the fact that you've engaged with many people on the other side in Afghanistan. Many thanks. We'll wrap up this conversation here.
Thanks.